My phone rang a little after 8 on Saturday morning. I rolled over, saw Mike's name, and almost ignored it. Mike never called that early unless something had gone wrong. "You alive?" he asked. "Barely. You need to get down here." I rubbed my eyes. "Down where?" "The Marina." That woke me up. "What happened?" He didn't answer. A picture came through instead. At first, I thought somebody had edited it. Blue balloons. A white event tent. Folding tables. A dozen pickup trucks. Right over the entrance hung a giant banner. Grand opening. HOA Marina membership registration. I zoomed in. The banner was covering my father's old cedar sign. I just stared at it. "What the hell am I looking at?" "My guess." Mike said. "They've lost their minds." I sat up. "You're serious?" "I wish I wasn't." "You sure that's today?" I'm standing in front of it. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd forgotten something. Maybe the county had approved an event. Maybe somebody had rented the parking lot. Maybe. No, none of that made sense. "Hang on," I said. "Who's running it?" "The HOA." "No, they've got volunteers." "So, they're selling Marina memberships." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. Mike didn't laugh. "I've already watched 3 people pay." That got me moving. I threw on a pair of jeans, grabbed yesterday's t-shirt off the chair, and headed for the truck. On the way out, my wife looked up from her coffee. "Everything okay?" "I honestly don't know." She frowned. "What happened?" "The HOA's apparently selling my Marina." She blinked once. "They're selling what?" "I'll call you." The drive normally took about 15 minutes. That morning it felt twice as long. Halfway there my phone buzzed again. Another picture. This one showed a line of people waiting at folding tables. Someone was holding up a blue welcome bag like they'd just won a raffle. A third text came in from one of my slip renters. "Did you approve this?" Then another. "Congratulations, I guess." I didn't answer either one. I didn't know what to say. As I turned onto the county road leading to the Marina, traffic slowed to a crawl. A kid wearing an orange safety vest was waving cars into the gravel lot. Couldn't have been older than 16. He pointed at an empty space. I rolled my window down. "I'm actually headed to the Marina." He laughed. "So's everybody else." "No." I pointed past him. "I own it." He stopped smiling. "You own what?" "The Marina." "Oh." He looked toward the registration tent, then back at me. I should probably let them deal with that. That was the first hint that people genuinely believe the HOA was in charge. I parked near the bait shop. The smell of grilled hot dogs drifted across the lot. Country music crackled through a cheap speaker. A Labrador wandered between coolers until somebody called, "Duke, leave that alone." It felt like a neighborhood picnic. Until you actually looked around. There were banners everywhere. Matching blue shirts. Printed brochures. Even a photographer taking pictures of smiling families. A volunteer spotted me. "Morning. Morning. You here for a membership?" "No." She handed me a brochure anyway. "We're almost sold out of founders memberships." I glanced at the price. $2,500. I looked back at her. "People are paying that." "Oh yeah." She smiled proudly. "They're going fast." A little receipt printer chirped beside her. She tore off another receipt. "See?" It sounded exactly like the printer in my bait shop. For some reason, that bothered me more than the banner. Mike walked over carrying 2 paper coffee cups. "I figured you'd need this." He handed me one. "You weren't kidding." "Nope." He nodded toward the registration table. "They've been taking money for over an hour. Anybody question it?" "A couple people." "What happened?" He shrugged. "The board kept saying the HOA owns the Marina now." I took a sip of coffee. Still hot. So everyone just believed them? Mike looked around. I mean, he wasn't wrong. The event looked professional. If you drove in off the highway without knowing the history, you'd probably believe it too. Then I saw Vanessa. She was standing near the front table, shaking hands like it was election day. She noticed me almost immediately. Instead of looking nervous, she smiled. A big one. She walked straight over. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning. I was wondering when you'd get here. I figured somebody should explain why there's a giant HOA banner covering my family's sign." She glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, that's temporary." "The banner." "Yes. My sign isn't." She folded her arms. "The board voted to assume control of the Marina." I stared at her. "No, we did." "You voted." "Yes." "To take somebody else's property?" She didn't even blink. "We voted to manage a community asset." "It isn't a community asset." "It is now." Before I could answer, Two sheriff's SUVs rolled slowly into the parking lot. One of the volunteers clapped her hands. Oh good, they're finally here. Vanessa smoothed the front of her jacket, looked back at me, and smiled again. Perfect. She nodded toward the deputies climbing out of their vehicles. Now we can settle this. The two deputies didn't rush. They climbed out of their SUVs, adjusted their duty belts, and walked toward the registration tables like they were responding to a noise complaint instead of whatever this was. The older one stopped a few feet from us. Morning. Nobody answered right away. He looked around. So, he smiled politely. Who's calling this one in? Vanessa stepped forward before I could say a word. I am. She pointed at me. This gentleman has been disrupting our community event. The deputy looked at me. You want to tell me your side? I own the Marina. He nodded once. Okay. Then he looked back at Vanessa. And you? The HOA assumed control after a board vote. Assumed control? Yes. He didn't react. He just pulled out a small notebook. I'll need to see whatever paperwork both of you are relying on. Vanessa looked relieved. Of course. She motioned toward one of the volunteers. Linda grabbed the binder. The volunteer hurried to the registration table and came back with a thick blue binder full of tabs. Meanwhile, I walked to my truck. Mike followed. You keep copies in here? Always. Good. I opened the glove box and pulled out a weathered folder. Certified deed. Property survey. County tax records. I'd carried copies for years after an easement dispute with a utility company. Never imagined I'd need them. Because my own HOA decided to sell memberships. When we walked back, the deputy had the HOA binder open. Vanessa sounded confident again. We've maintained the Marina for years. She pointed to photographs. Dock repairs. Another page. Landscaping. Another. Insurance payments. The deputy flipped through everything without commenting. Finally, he asked, Do you have a deed? Vanessa hesitated. We have years of maintenance records. I understand. He kept his tone friendly. I'm asking about ownership. The board voted. I understand. He smiled again. I'm asking if anyone brought a deed. Nobody answered. The younger deputy quietly accepted my folder. Mind if I? Go ahead. He opened it. The certified county seal was impossible to miss. So this is the recorded deed. Yes. He checked the survey, then the tax bill, then the legal description. You've owned it long? My father bought it in 1996. Mike couldn't help himself. Built half the docks himself. The deputy looked up. That true? It is. The older deputy walked over and looked at my paperwork. He compared the parcel number with something on his tablet. Then he looked back at Vanessa. Do you have anything showing this property changed ownership? She shook her head. No. Any purchase agreement? No. Condemnation order? No. Eminent domain? No. The younger deputy closed my folder. So as of right now, he glanced at the older deputy. The county records still show Mr. Carter. Before anyone could say anything else, another SUV pulled into the lot. Claire climbed out carrying 2 banker boxes. She spotted me inside. I figured I'd find you here. Mike laughed. You came prepared. I know Daniel. She set the boxes down. I brought certified copies. The older deputy chuckled. You two work together often? Only when people start inventing property rights. A couple of residents laughed. Even one of the volunteers smiled before realizing she probably shouldn't. The county clerk arrived a minute later. She'd been called by dispatch to verify the parcel records. She introduced herself, accepted my deed, and logged into the county database on her tablet. Nobody spoke. While she searched, the only sound was the little receipt printer. Chirp. Another membership sold. The deputy glanced toward the table. Still taking payments? One volunteer froze with a credit card in her hand. She looked at Vanessa. Vanessa gave the smallest nod. The printer chirped again. The county clerk finally looked up. I've got it. Everyone turned. She rotated the tablet so both deputies could see. Parcel 18 to 442. She tapped the screen. Owner of record. A short pause. Daniel Carter. She scrolled a little farther. No ownership transfer. No pending transfer. No recorded claim by the HOA. The older deputy thanked her. Then he looked back at Vanessa. I'll ask one more time. His voice stayed calm. Did anyone on the board verify ownership before selling memberships today? Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, then quietly said, No. Before anyone could react, a man near the front of the registration line slowly raised his hand. He was still holding a blue welcome bag. Excuse me. Everybody looked at him. I just paid $2,500. He looked from Vanessa to the deputies, then to me. So who exactly did I buy this from? The man looked genuinely confused. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He just held up his receipt. I'd really like an answer. The older deputy accepted it. He glanced at the total. $2,500. Then at the timestamp. Paid less than 5 minutes earlier. What exactly were you told you were buying? The man shrugged. A founder's membership. What does that include? He handed over the brochure. The deputy skimmed it. Priority dock access, member events, discounted storage, reserved launch privileges. He looked up. Who explained this to you? The man pointed toward the registration table. One of the volunteers. The volunteer immediately shook her head. I just read what was in the brochure. You didn't write it? No. I was helping. She sounded more embarrassed than defensive. Another resident stepped forward. I bought one too. He pulled a folded receipt from his wallet. So did my brother. A woman near the back of the line raised her hand. We signed up together. Within seconds, 6 or 7 people were digging through purses and pockets. Receipts started appearing everywhere. Mike leaned toward me. That's not great. No, it really isn't. The younger deputy collected the receipts into a neat stack. Let's hold on to these for a minute. Nobody argued. The county clerk looked over the first receipt. Same payment processor. She checked another. And another. The older deputy asked the obvious question. How many memberships have been sold today? Vanessa hesitated. Greg, who had been standing near the tent without saying much all morning, answered instead. 25. Every head turned toward him. The deputy looked at his notebook. So roughly, he did the math in his head. About $62,000. Greg nodded. Approximately. Nobody spoke for a second. Even the country music coming from the speaker suddenly seemed too loud. One of the volunteers quietly walked over and turned it off. The parking lot became strangely quiet. Across the marina, somebody dropped a tackle box. The metal latches clattered against the dock. A gull cried somewhere out over the water. That was about it. The deputy looked back at Greg. Where's the money going? The HOA operating account. Has any of it been spent? No. Good. Greg nodded. It's still there. The deputy wrote another note. A pickup pulled into the lot just then. The driver slowed when he saw the sheriff's SUVs. Instead of parking, he rolled down his window. Marina closed today? Mike answered before anyone else could. Long story. The driver looked around at the crowd. I'll come back later. He drove off without another question. Nobody even watched him leave. The reporter who'd been taking pictures all morning finally stepped closer. She introduced herself to the deputies. I've been covering the community festival. She held up her camera. I ended up here by accident. The deputy smiled. That happens. I've been recording since before you arrived. You catch much? She looked around. I think I caught most of it. He nodded. I may ask for copies later. No problem. She stepped back without trying to interview anyone. She understood this wasn't the time. The county clerk finished comparing the receipts. Everything matches. She handed them back to the deputy. Same merchant account. Same event. Same day. The deputy thanked her. Then he looked toward the registration tent. Can someone show me exactly where people signed up? One of the volunteers raised her hand. I can. She walked him over. There were clipboards, membership forms, blue welcome bags, stacks of brochures, a brand new card reader. The deputy picked up one of the brochures again. He read it more carefully this time. Then he stopped. He turned a page back. Read it again. Interesting. Claire noticed. What? He handed her the brochure. Second paragraph. She read silently for a few seconds, then looked up. Welcome to your community-owned marina. She read the line again, out loud this time. Community-owned marina. The words hung there. The deputy looked toward the entrance where the giant HOA banner still covered most of the cedar sign. Then he asked a simple question. What's behind that banner? Nobody answered. Mike looked at me. I've been wondering the same thing. The deputy looked at the banner again. Can somebody move it? Nobody volunteered. The 2 teenagers working the entrance looked at each other. One finally shrugged. I've got a ladder. Appreciate it. He jogged over to a maintenance shed and came back dragging an aluminum stepladder. Don't tear it, Vanessa said. It's rented. The deputy smiled. We're not here to damage anybody's property. The kid climbed up, loosened 2 zip ties, then another. The banner sagged. One more tie snapped loose. The blue vinyl slid halfway down. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Underneath was my father's cedar sign. Carter Marina. Established 1996. The wood was faded from nearly 30 years of sun. One corner had a small crack from a storm the previous winter. I kept meaning to fix it. Never got around to it. Mike looked up and grinned. There's the old girl. The older deputy stepped closer. That's been here the whole time. Since my dad opened the place. A man near the back scratched his head. I've driven past that sign for years. So have I, another resident said. I guess I never really looked at it. The deputy ran his hand across the edge of the cedar. No HOA logo. No. No association name. No. Just Carter Marina. That's all it's ever been. The reporter took several pictures before anyone stepped in front of the sign again. One of the volunteers quietly folded the banner the rest of the way down. She didn't hang it back up. The deputy turned toward Vanessa. Did the board know this sign was here? She looked at it for a long moment. Yes. And no one questioned it. She hesitated. I don't think we ever discussed it. One of the newer board members frowned. I honestly thought the HOA built this place. Mike laughed. Not even close. My dad poured half the concrete himself, I said. The board member looked embarrassed. I moved here 4 years ago. I just assumed. He let the sentence die. An older resident standing nearby chuckled. I remember when they were setting these docks. He pointed toward the shoreline. I was fishing over there. He looked at me. Your father paid us in barbecue and cold beer. Mike smiled. Sounds like Frank. The old man nodded. Best brisket I've ever had. For the first time all morning, a few people actually laughed. The tension eased. Just a little. The deputy let the moment pass before asking another question. Ms. Reynolds. Vanessa looked over. When the board voted. Yes. What exactly did you believe you were voting on? She answered honestly. We believe the marina belonged to the community. Based on what? Our property manager's recommendation. Did anyone independently verify ownership? No. County records? No. Title search? No. Attorney opinion? Vanessa paused. Yes. Claire looked up. You have a legal opinion? We were told the attorney reviewed everything. The deputy's notebook stopped moving. I'd like to see that. Vanessa turned toward one of the board members. Tom, do you still have the packet? Tom nodded. I think so. He walked quickly to his truck, opened the back door, and started digging through a leather briefcase. Mike leaned over. This ought to be interesting. Maybe. You don't sound convinced. I'm not. Why? If an attorney actually said the HOA owned my marina. I shrugged. I'd like to meet that attorney. A few minutes later, Tom returned carrying a neatly clipped stack of papers. I found it. He handed the packet to the deputy. The cover page read, Legal Review, Marina Operations. The deputy flipped to the first page. Claire stepped beside him. Neither of them said a word as they read. After about 30 seconds, Claire reached out. May I? The deputy handed her the packet. She read the first page, then the second. Then she frowned. What is it? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she flipped to the very last page, looked at the signature, then went back to the beginning. Finally, she looked up. This. She tapped the packet with one finger. Isn't the opinion I expected. Everyone waited. Claire slowly turned another page. Something's missing. Claire kept flipping back and forth between the pages. The deputy noticed. What are you looking for? The conclusion. It isn't there? Not exactly. She turned the packet around so he could see. This first page is a summary. The deputy nodded. Okay. But it isn't the attorney's summary. He looked closer. How can you tell? The formatting. She pointed at the margins. The law firm's letterhead starts on page 2. She flipped another page. This page was created separately. Tom frowned. That's the packet we received. Claire looked at him. I believe you. She tapped the first page again. But whoever put this together added their own cover summary. The deputy read the first paragraph out loud. The HOA possesses sufficient authority to oversee and manage marina operations for the benefit of the community. He looked up. Sounds straightforward. It does. Claire turned to page 3. Now keep reading. The deputy scanned the paragraph below the attorney's signature block. His eyebrows lifted just a little. What? Mike asked. The deputy handed the packet to Claire. You read it. She cleared her throat. Nothing in this memorandum should be interpreted as an opinion regarding ownership of the marina property. Nobody spoke. She continued. Questions of title and ownership require an independent examination of county land records. The silence lasted longer this time. Tom blinked. Wait. He took the packet back. I never saw that. Another board member stepped beside him. Neither did I. They both started flipping through the pages. Vanessa reached over. Let me see. The three of them stood shoulder to shoulder, reading the same paragraph over and over. Tom finally looked up. Our meeting packet only had the summary. Claire nodded. I was wondering about that. The attorney never said the HOA owned the marina. No. He actually said the opposite. He said ownership wasn't being addressed at all. Mike let out a low whistle. Well, that's a problem. The older deputy looked at Vanessa. When the board voted, she answered before he finished. We believe the attorney had already confirmed ownership. Claire gently shook her head. That's not what this says. Vanessa looked genuinely stunned. She stopped. I never read the full memorandum. You only received this? Claire held up the summary page. Yes. So did everyone else. One by one, the other board members nodded. The deputy wrote something in his notebook. Then he asked the question everyone was already thinking. Who assembled the board packet? Nobody answered immediately. Across the parking lot, somebody cracked open a can of Coke. The sound seemed oddly loud. A little boy tugged on his dad's sleeve. Can we go fishing now? His dad smiled awkwardly. Not yet, buddy. The deputy waited. He didn't rush anyone. Finally, Tom spoke. Greg. Vanessa closed her eyes for a second. Greg, the property manager? Yes. He prepares every meeting packet. The deputy looked toward the registration tent. Greg was helping a volunteer carry one of the cash boxes toward the trailer. He hadn't noticed everyone watching him. The deputy called out. Mr. Lawson. Greg turned. Sir, would you come over here for a minute? Greg smiled politely. Sure. He walked across the gravel lot without any sign that something had changed. What's going on? The deputy held up the packet. Did you prepare this board summary? Greg glanced at the cover. Page. Yeah. I condensed the attorney's memo. You wrote this first page? I did. Claire asked quietly. Did the attorney review your summary before it went to the board? Greg hesitated. No. So those were your words. I was just simplifying it. Claire looked back down at the attorney's memorandum, then at Greg. The problem is. She tapped the missing paragraph. Your summary left out the one sentence that changed the entire meaning. Greg didn't answer. For the first time all morning. He looked like he wished he'd brought the full memo instead. Greg looked from Claire to the deputy, then back at the packet. I wasn't trying to hide anything. Claire didn't argue. I'm sure that's how it started. What does that mean? It means leaving out one sentence can completely change a legal opinion. Greg folded his arms. I summarized it. You rewrote it. Same thing. No. Claire shook her head. It really isn't. The older deputy held out his hand. Can I see both pages? Claire gave him the attorney's memo along with Greg's summary. He laid them side by side on the hood of his SUV. Even standing a few feet away, the difference was obvious. One page came from the law firm. The other didn't. The deputy tapped the attorney's memo. This says ownership wasn't reviewed. Then he tapped Greg's summary. This doesn't mention ownership at all. Greg nodded slowly. I figured it wasn't relevant. Claire looked at him. It was the most important sentence in the entire document. Nobody interrupted her. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. The board members took turns reading the pages for themselves. Tom let out a long sigh. I voted because of this summary. So did I, another director admitted. Vanessa looked sick. She leaned against the registration table and quietly said, if we'd seen the full memo. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Mike leaned over to me. I think the board just realized what happened. I think so too. A volunteer walked over carrying 2 unopened cardboard boxes. Greg. He looked up. Yeah. Where do you want these? What are they? She set one on the table and peeled back the tape. Inside were neatly stacked welcome packets, blue folders, plastic key tags, window decals. The volunteer picked up one of the decals. It read, Owner Authorized Access. She frowned. I thought these were for members. The deputy reached for one. So did I. He held it up where everyone could see. Why does this say Owner Authorized Access? Greg stared at the decal for a second. He took it from the deputy. I honestly didn't notice that. The volunteer blinked. You approved the proof. I signed off on a lot of things. Mike muttered under his breath. Apparently, the deputy opened another welcome packet. Same decal. Same wording. He checked a third. No different. Who ordered these? Greg answered quietly. I did. Using HOA funds. Yes. When? 3 weeks ago. Before today's event. Yes. Before the board received the summary? Greg hesitated. Yes. Nobody said anything. The deputy wrote another note. An older board member looked at Greg. You already had these printed? Greg nodded. We were trying to stay ahead of schedule. The board member looked down at the decal in his hand. So, you already planned to call people owners. Before we even voted? Greg opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. That wasn't the intent. What was the intent? Greg didn't answer. Across the lot, Duke, the Labrador who'd been stealing hot dogs earlier, wandered back toward the crowd with a paper plate in his mouth. The little boy from before pointed and laughed. There he goes again. For a moment, everyone watched the dog trot proudly across the parking lot. Even one of the deputies smiled. The moment passed as quickly as it came. The older deputy turned back to Greg. One more question. Greg looked exhausted. Okay. Who approved the artwork for these decals? Greg looked down at the purchase order sticking out of the box. My office did. So, you approved the final version? Yes. Claire picked up the purchase order lying underneath the decals. She scanned the first page, then flipped to the back. Huh. The deputy looked over. What did you find? She pointed to a signature line near the bottom. It wasn't just the decals. What do you mean? Claire slid the purchase order across the hood of the SUV. Every brochure, every welcome bag, every parking pass, every banner, every key tag, every printed item for the event had been approved with the exact same signature. Greg Lawson. The parking lot had gone strangely quiet. Not silent, just quieter. The card reader wasn't beeping anymore. Nobody was standing in line. People who'd been waiting to buy memberships were now standing around holding brochures they didn't seem to know what to do with. The older deputy tucked the purchase order into his notebook. Mr. Lawson. Greg looked up. Yes. I'd like to ask you about these approvals. They're standard. What do you mean? I approved the print proofs. All of them. Yes. The banners. Yes. The brochures. Yes. The parking passes? Yes. The decals. Greg nodded after every question. The deputy looked toward the registration tables. So every piece of material people saw today went through you? I suppose so. The reporter quietly snapped another photo. She still hadn't asked anyone for an interview. She didn't need one. The story was unfolding by itself. One of the volunteers walked over carrying a half-empty box. I found something else. She handed Greg a stack of laminated parking passes. Across the top, in big blue letters, they read, Marina Owner Access. She frowned. I thought these were member passes. Greg looked at them for a second. They're the same thing. The volunteer tilted her head. Then why doesn't it say member access? Greg didn't answer. The deputy accepted one of the passes. He turned it over. On the back was a small line of print. Authorized by Greg Lawson. He looked up. You signed these too? That's just part of the approval process. Tom reached over for one of the passes. I never saw these. Another director shook his head. Neither did I. Vanessa looked surprised. I thought we'd approve the artwork. Greg rubbed the back of his neck. You approved the budget, not the wording. We don't usually review every detail. Claire spoke for the first time in nearly a minute. That's exactly why details matter. Nobody argued with her. The younger deputy picked up one of the brochures again. This says Community-Owned Marina. He held up the parking pass. This says Marina Owner Access. Then the decal. Owner Authorized Access. He looked at Greg. Different products. Different wording. Same idea. Greg swallowed. I can explain. Please do. I was trying to keep everything consistent. Consistent with what? Greg hesitated. The plan. What plan? The membership launch. The deputy waited. Greg finally sighed. We wanted it to feel professional. Mike let out a short laugh. Oh, it looked professional. Several people nodded. That wasn't really the issue anymore. An older resident stepped forward. I've got a question. The deputy gestured for him to go ahead. If the HOA thought it owned the marina. He pointed toward the cedar sign at the entrance. Why'd they hang a banner over the name instead of taking the sign down? Nobody answered. The old man shrugged. Just seems odd. Mike looked at me. I never thought about that. Neither had I. The deputy turned back to Greg. Why cover the sign? Greg shifted his weight. We didn't want people getting confused. The deputy stared at him for a second. So you thought seeing Carter Marina would confuse people during an event where you were selling memberships? Greg realized what he'd just admitted. His shoulders dropped. I didn't mean. No. The deputy closed his notebook. I think you did. Across the parking lot, someone started taking the blue balloons down. One popped. Everybody flinched. A little girl covered her ears. Her mother laughed and picked her up. The normal sounds of a Saturday slowly started coming back. Boat trailers rattled down the county road. A base boat idled past the docks. The bait shop door chimed as a customer walked inside. It was almost enough to make the morning feel normal again. Almost. The county clerk walked over holding her tablet. I found the event permit. The deputy looked up. Anything interesting? She turned the screen toward him. The application wasn't filed by the HOA. It wasn't. She shook her head. It wasn't filed by the management company either. Tom frowned. Then who filed it? The clerk zoomed in on the signature block. Everyone leaned a little closer. Applicant, Greg Lawson. Organization, Lawson Property Services. The deputy looked at Greg. So this wasn't even submitted under the HOA. Greg stared at the screen. No. Why not? He answered so quietly that only the people closest to him heard it. Because I didn't think it mattered. The deputy slipped his notebook back into his pocket. I have a feeling. He glanced at the permit. It's about to matter a whole lot. Greg looked at the permit for a long time. Long enough that nobody felt the need to ask another question. The older deputy finally broke the silence. You said you didn't think it mattered. Greg nodded. I didn't. Help me understand that. Greg took a slow breath. The HOA didn't have an event account set up. So I filed it under my company. You paid the permit fee? Yes. Out of pocket? Yes. You expected the HOA to reimburse you. That was the plan. The deputy looked toward Vanessa. Did you approve that? She nodded. I approved the expense. Did you know the permit was under Greg's company? No. I assumed it was under the HOA. Tom looked at Greg. So did I. Another board member sighed. I don't remember anyone mentioning your company. Greg rubbed his forehead. It was just paperwork. Claire spoke quietly. Paperwork is exactly what brought us here. Nobody argued with that. The deputy asked another question. Who approved today's event? The board. What exactly did they approve? Greg hesitated. A Marina open house. Tom immediately shook his head. Community Marina open house. That's what the agenda said. Another director pointed toward the registration tables. We never voted on memberships. No. We never voted on founders' packages. No. We never voted to collect money. Vanessa looked down at the binder in her hands. We didn't. The deputy flipped through the meeting minutes. He found the page. Read it once. Then handed it to Claire. She nodded. That's consistent. What do you see? The agenda only mentions an open house. No sales event. No membership program. No pricing. No authority to collect payments. Mike let out a low whistle. So somewhere between the meeting, he looked around at the banners. And today, this turned into something completely different. Greg looked exhausted. It wasn't supposed to become this. The older deputy looked at him. Then when did it change? Greg didn't answer. A young volunteer standing beside the trailer slowly raised her hand. I think I know. Everyone turned toward her. She couldn't have been more than 20. She still had a blue volunteer badge hanging around her neck. What do you know? The deputy asked. We had a planning meeting. When? About 2 weeks ago. Were board members there? Just Greg. She looked around nervously. And the volunteers. What happened? We asked if everything had been approved. And he said yes. She swallowed. We asked if the board needed to vote again. The deputy waited. What did he say? She looked straight at Greg. He said, by the time anyone asks questions, people will already be members. Greg shook his head immediately. I didn't say that. The volunteer didn't look away. You did. I was joking. She frowned. It didn't sound like a joke. Another volunteer spoke from the back of the crowd. I remember that too. Heads turned again. She stepped forward carrying her phone. I wasn't paying much attention until she mentioned it. She unlocked the screen. I actually have part of that meeting. Greg's eyes widened. You recorded it? My daughter wanted pictures for Instagram. She gave an awkward smile. I hit video by accident. She found the clip and pressed play. At first there wasn't much. People moving folding chairs. Someone asking where the extension cords were. A cooler lid slamming shut. Then Greg's voice. Clear enough that everyone standing nearby could hear it. Once the first memberships are sold, people will assume everything's already been approved. Someone off camera asked, "What if somebody asks about the board vote?" Greg answered without hesitation, "We'll deal with that if it happens." The video ended. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for the phone. The deputy simply looked at the volunteer. "Would you be willing to email me that recording?" "Absolutely." He handed her his card. She typed in the address while standing there. The younger deputy looked across the parking lot. The registration tables were being folded. The blue banners were stacked in the trailer. People who'd paid for memberships were now standing in line for refund forms instead. He turned back toward Greg. "I think we've answered one question." Greg looked up. "What question?" The deputy slipped the business card back into his pocket. "How this happened?" He paused. "The next question is who's responsible for making it happen." By late afternoon, the Marina looked tired. The balloons were gone. The music had been turned off hours ago. Volunteers were folding tables and stacking empty boxes into a trailer. Someone was peeling blue tape off the pavement where people had stood in line that morning. If you hadn't been there, you'd never guess nearly $60,000 had changed hands. The older deputy walked over to Greg one last time. "I'll need copies of everything." Greg nodded. "The emails?" "Okay." "The invoices?" "Okay." "The print orders?" "Okay." "The planning notes?" Greg gave a tired smile. "I get it." The deputy handed him a business card. "Don't delete anything." "I won't." "I mean it." "I know." There wasn't much fight left in him. Vanessa carried a banker box over to the deputies. Inside were board packets, meeting minutes, budgets, and handwritten notes. "I want you to have all of it," she said. "We're not trying to hide anything." The deputy accepted the box. "I appreciate that." Tom stepped beside her. "I'd like something added to your report." "Go ahead." "The board never voted to buy this marina." The deputy wrote it down. "We never voted to take private property." Another director nodded. "We approved an open house." "And maintenance." "Nothing beyond that." The deputy thanked them. Claire closed her binder with a soft thump. "That distinction matters." Vanessa looked over. "You think the attorney will care?" "I think everyone will." The reporter finally walked over. She'd packed away her camera, but still carried a small notebook. "Daniel?" "Yeah." "One last question." I laughed. "I've heard that a few times today." She smiled. "I really mean it this time." "Go ahead. What happens tomorrow?" I looked toward the docks. A father was helping his daughter untie a little fishing boat. Two regular renters were loading coolers into the back of a pickup. Duke, the Labrador, was asleep in the shade under Mike's truck like none of this had ever happened. I shrugged. "I unlocked the gate at 7. "That's it." "That's it." "You don't have a speech planned?" "No." "A celebration?" I smiled. "I've got a fuel delivery coming at 9. She laughed. "I guess that's your answer." "It usually is." Mike walked over carrying a cordless drill. He pointed toward the cedar sign. "That loose corner's been bothering me all day." I'd almost forgotten about it. The wind had worked one of the screws loose months earlier. "I've got another screw in the workshop." "Let's fix it." The three of us walked over. Mike held the sign steady while I tightened the new screw into the cedar. The drill whined for about 5 seconds. "Done." Nothing fancy. Just one small repair that should have happened a long time ago. Mike stepped back. "There." He brushed the sawdust off his jeans. "Looks like your dad would have wanted." I looked at the sign. The wood was still weathered. Still cracked in one corner. Still unmistakably his. Yeah. I think he'd approve. About 5 weeks later, the county finished reviewing everything. The recorded deed had never changed. The marina had always belonged to me. Every membership payment collected that morning was refunded. The HOA adopted a new rule requiring county ownership records before approving projects involving private property. At the next board meeting, Greg resigned as property manager. Nobody applauded. Nobody argued. He simply gathered his things, thanked the board for the opportunity, and walked out. Vanessa resigned as president shortly afterward. She stopped by the marina a few days later. Not for a meeting, not to debate anything, just to hand me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "I should have checked the records myself. I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses. No legal language. No blaming Greg. Just one sentence. I never wrote back. I didn't think I needed to. A couple of months later, I stopped by the local print shop to pick up new dock maps. The owner disappeared into the back room for a minute. When he came back, he was carrying one of the blue banners from that Saturday. The HOA never came back for the extra one. He grinned. Figured you might want it. I laughed. I probably shouldn't. Probably not. But I took it anyway. Today it's folded on a shelf in the workshop above a cabinet full of spare dock cleats and old life jackets. Every now and then someone notices it. They usually ask the same question. Why'd you keep that thing? I tell them it reminds me of something. Not that people lie. People do that every day. It reminds me how easily confidence can sound like authority, right up until somebody asks to see the paperwork.